Lawmakers struggle to find agreement on concealed carry legislation. That's up next on Capitol View. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Capitol View, the show where we talk about Illinois politics and government. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn, with Illinois Issues magazine, and with me today is Charlie Wheeler, Director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at University of Illinois, Springfield. Charlie, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And Mike Lawrence, former Director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute in Carbondale. Mike, glad to have you back.
Good to be back, Jamey.
Well, the House was not in session this week, but the Senate was in. We were expecting to maybe see some concealed carry legislation emerge in the Senate, but it seems like the negotiations have hit some bumps. Last week, we saw the House reject two different concealed carry bills. One was a bit more restrictive, one was more permissive. Charlie, can you kind of catch us up of where do we stand right now with concealed carry?
Well, I think we're still in a situation where there are negotiations going back and forth between the folks who are very concerned about allowing people to carry concealed weapons in the state, largely people from Chicago and the suburbs that see guns as a threat to their communities. And on the other hand, you have the people who are very strong advocates of the Second Amendment rights and believe that folks should be allowed to carry for their own protection. And the bills you alluded to, one bill got more than 60, which is the usual vote required to pass something in the House. I believe it had 67, or no, I take it back, it had 64 votes. And it needed 71 because it would take away the power of home rule municipalities, cities like Chicago, to have stricter regulations. And under the rules, it requires an extraordinary majority. The other bill you mentioned only had about 30 or so votes, and that one was very restrictive. And so there's still some negotiations that have to be done. And of course, we're under the deadline imposed by the U.S. Appellate Court that says as of the 9th of June, the law that is currently on the books no longer counts. The law that makes it, I think the charge is unlawful carrying a weapon or something like that. It's, in other words, you can't do it now. The appellate judge said this violates the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I'll give you guys till June 9th to enact some kind of replacement that allows for concealed carry, and if you don't, all bets are off.
Well, and the details on this are, of course, very important, but it seems like there's one main issue that is really the sticking point is whether Chicago and larger home rule municipalities will get a say in how this is regulated in their area, or whether we'll see something that is just the same across the entire state. Mike, I mean, can we find some kind of middle ground before the end of session on this issue? This seems to be always the issue with gun control as far as how Chicago will be treated versus how the rest of the state will be treated.
Well, ordinarily, the kind of solution, proposed solution you described would be the kind of thing that would probably fly in the end. But the gun rights supporters, particularly the NRA, feel like they have a lot of leverage, and they do because of that appellate court decision that Charlie discussed. And so they're not in a real strong mood to compromise. And they figure that if there is no resolution by June 9th, then in their view, there's a good possibility that everybody in the state can pack. So, and the other thing to remember, and it is a regional issue in large part, as Charlie indicated, one view in Chicago generally and another view downstate. But the NRA and other gun rights groups do have members in Chicago and Cook County, and I think they're going to be reluctant to do something that in their minds would sell out those members.
Yeah, and I think the discussion that had been underway in the Senate, and you alluded to the expectation there might be a vote this week, which did not occur, was an attempt to kind of carve out an exception. The basic law would say if you meet the qualifications and you clear the background check with the state police, you get your permit to carry. And the wrinkle would be in Chicago and in Cook County, there would be the opportunity for the Chicago Police Department, the superintendent, or the Cook County Sheriff to say, well, wait a second, I'm not sure that Wheeler, even though he meets all the stuff on paper, I'm not sure Wheeler's the kind of guy we want carrying a gun. Sheriffs in the other 101 counties wouldn't have the ability to do that. It would be particularly responsive to the fears in Chicago that the wrong people would be carrying weapons. And as Mike said, in the rest of the state, that's not that type of an issue. And in fact, in downstate communities, you think of firearms and you think of going deer hunting or going duck hunting. It has nothing to do with the kind of gang warfare and the kids being murdered that you see in the city.
Well, and gun control activists would like to see some more what they call basic safety measures going along with this, looking at creating universal background checks. So anytime a gun is sold, there's a background check. Right now, if you sell a gun to your friend, there isn't a requirement for a background check. And looking at fixing the state's FOID card system, which has had a lot of issues recently. Charlie, do you think we'll see any of these things accompanying, maybe not as part of the concealed carry bill, but alongside this? Governor Quinn has said he needs to see more than just concealed carry.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, the bill that the concealed carry supporters were behind in the House included some of that stuff. They did make some compromises in terms of having a higher fee for the ID or for the permit that would cover increased background checks and pay some of the other administrative costs, requiring additional training before you were deemed eligible to have concealed carry. So there have been some compromises along the way. And I think the what would you say, the opportunities are there to craft a solution that will get enough votes to pass. It won't make anybody totally happy, but usually when you have a compromise, that's the way it works out. There's enough in there that people can support it without getting everything they want. And on an issue like gun control, you'll never be able to pass legislation, in my mind, that will make either side 100% happy.
Well, the other issue that lawmakers are looking to address this session is pension reform. We also had heard rumors that we might see a pension reform kind of compromise bill, at least a hearing on it in the Senate, but we did not see that this week. It could come next week. The thought is that Senate President John Cullerton has worked out something with the unions that they might be able to stomach. Charlie, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there and what we might see next week out of this legislation?
Well, the basic premise that Senator Cullerton has been working on from day one on pensions is that because of the guarantee clause in the Constitution saying membership in a retirement system, a public retirement system, creates a contractual relationship and its benefits cannot be diminished or impaired, that there can't be any unilateral imposition of reduced benefits by the state on the 5 retirement systems for which it's responsible. And so there has to be a kind of an agreement between the parties to the contract, the state and the worker, to diminish benefits. And for that to occur, there has to be, the worker has to, in essence, get something in return, this consideration for going along with it. And that's what Senator Cullerton has been working on. And it's focusing on health care, access to health care, subsidized health insurance. And under one of the versions that's probably gotten the most attention, if you are a member of a retirement system, you have to decide, do I want to continue with my benefits the way they are, where I get a 3%, once I retire, 3% cost of living adjustment, compounded annually, or and forego any opportunity to have state subsidized health insurance? Or do I want to accept lower cost of living based on smaller salary and continue to have access to state subsidized health care? And the unions are trying to work this out with President Cullerton to see if they can come to a vote. What would you say, the sticking point I see in that is that the negotiations have been largely with AFSCME, which is the largest public employees union representing state workers. On the other hand, the by far largest group of public employees covered in this whole retirement discussion are teachers outside the city of Chicago, members of the teachers' retirement system. And I would venture to say few, if any, are represented by AFSCME. They're represented either by the Illinois Education Association or the Illinois Federation of Teachers. And so if AFSCME agrees to something, what kind of impact or kind of legal obligation are the other unions under to go along with it? And maybe even more particularly in my case and in your case too, we're both members of the state university retirement system, and we are not unionized at all. Now, as I've said on this show many times, because I'm very proud of it, I'm a lifetime member of the Chicago Newspaper Guild, which is part of the Communication Workers of America. So I'm a union guy, you know, through and through. But as a professor at the University of Illinois Springfield, I do not have a union representing me. So that decision, should it come to that, about do I want to forego cost of living in return for health insurance, nobody can make that for me. I'd have to do it for myself.
Well, and Mike, we're also hearing rumors that any change may not touch current retirees, so we may not see a change to the cost of living increases for people who are already retired. Would a plan like that go far enough as far as savings? I mean, that seems to be the area that people are really trying to target in the House.
Well, there's a lot of dispute about how you get to a point where the pension system the pension systems are stable. But I think many people believe that it would not go far enough. And the other thing I would add on to what Charlie said, the unions can negotiate it. In this case, AFSCME is at the table. Even if the others were there, it would not prohibit an individual annuitant or state employee from going to court. Yeah. Now, maybe the thinking is, well, if you had the unions, all the unions on board, maybe it would strengthen the case before the court. But it's not going to stop a lawsuit in and of itself. And then above and beyond that, there is the question of how far it will go to stabilize those pension systems.
I think you make a good point, Mike. That's something that I was thinking of as soon as I heard about this, that the unions can't really give a stamp of constitutionality to this, can they, Charlie? I mean, they can agree, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be a constitutional plan in the end.
No. But as Mike said, if there were a case brought by me as an individual, and on the other hand, the unions representing all the other people who are in these systems said, well, no, we agree this is constitutional, that might carry some weight with the court. I don't honestly see that happening, though, because I think the constitutional language is pretty darn clear, and it's a real stretch. And in all honesty, I don't understand how people who are lawyers and who claim to be experts in this can say, oh, the court can just ignore the Constitution. I don't think it works that way, but I'm only a layman, so, you know, what do I know?
Well, this week, Texas Governor Rick Perry traveled to Illinois in an effort to poach jobs and business from Illinois. You know, when governors come and do this, we all kind of maybe have a bit of a chuckle out of it, don't necessarily take it that seriously. But we also saw some reports out this week showing that Illinois is kind of lagging behind on the economic recovery, that we're not doing so well when it comes to bringing back jobs. Charlie or Mike, what do you think that is? Are there some things that stand out to you as to why Illinois is maybe struggling at recovery?
Well, I think one thing you have to look at is the state's fiscal situation with a major pension problem, to put it mildly, and the kind of budget issues, a huge backlog in bills. Businesses who are here and looking to expand, or those looking to come in, are thinking, well, at some point, these things are going to have to be addressed, and how are they going to be addressed? What are they going to do to our bottom line? And I think the uncertainty about that, more than anything, is a deterrent to businesses coming in. Now, Illinois has had some historic issues as well compared to our neighboring states. the business community feels very strongly that our workers' compensation laws are out of line and that they don't make us competitive with other states in terms of attracting businesses. So, and the other thing I think businesses will look to and are looking to is our education system. And to the extent that we have problems in our education system, particularly I would say in the metropolitan area, but certainly not limited to that, they're concerned about the future workforce in Illinois. So I think these are real problems. I kind of don't take too seriously Governor Perry coming in and doing his thing any more than I did with Governor Walker from Wisconsin. But I do think they call attention to some really fundamental issues in our state.
Well,
Yeah, and I would agree with Mike because Governor Quinn's response was, well, yeah, but we have water and Texas doesn't. And Texas, particularly certain parts of Texas, has been under a great stress because of drought. We were kind of there, but after the last couple of weeks, I think we got the exact reverse of that going for us.
yeah, poor Governor Quinn, and not to make light of the floods, but he says that, and then we get the floods.
Yes,
3 days
yes.
later.
That's pretty effective. I wish he'd say something. Now we're going to we have plenty of money, and more would come raining in. But we do have advantages. As a matter of fact, I saw some data that shows that Illinois has a better educated workforce, or better educated populace than Texas, for example. The state is blessed with transportation facilities second to none. The rail, the interstates, the water transportation. So if you are making something you need to ship somewhere, we're far superior to most other states. Chicago is a financial capital of the country, not the, but a, and it's a world-class city. And I would say that Chicago has got more going for it than, no offense, than anywhere in Texas. So there's a lot of things that make the state of Illinois, the Chicago area, appealing. As Mike said, there's things that we have to work on, but they're not things that can't be solved if people would put their minds to it and try and work out compromises on some of these. Workers' compensation is a good example. We reformed workers' compensation mostly by reducing the amounts of money that we would pay to healthcare providers who take care of people injured on the job. And we're still way up there in terms of the cost of insurance for our companies. We need to, I think, to look at what constitutes an injury on the job. That's an area, causation it's called, that the business community has been urging us to look at for a long time. And that's something that can be resolved. And I think that in the long run, Illinois is in better shape than Texas or than New Jersey. Governor Christie was here, and he didn't have much success in luring people away, or Wisconsin. I mean, I love Wisconsin. I go there every summer, but it doesn't have the advantages, I don't think, that Illinois does.
But as you said, like on the causation issue, that almost derailed the negotiations over workers' comp when that came up. I mean, what would it take to get folks to revisit that?
I think it would take a little bit of leadership on the side of business and the unions to sit down and work out a process, recognizing that this is an issue. What changes can be made? What reasonable changes can be made? Maybe instead of saying, if there's any relationship whatsoever to your injury and your work, you're entitled to collect, maybe saying there has to be a certain percentage relationship, maybe more than half, maybe 25%. As I say, this is something that can be negotiated out, and it's the kind of issue that I think in the minds of a lot of business leaders is much more important than the fact that our income tax is has been raised a couple years ago substantially, and will this stay at this level or not? We've all heard the stories that most corporations don't have any taxable income in Illinois anyway. And so the rates aren't as important, I would argue, as the insurance rates they pay for workers' comp.
Right, well, next week when the House does return, advocates for same-sex marriage are hoping that they can find the votes to pass a bill. I think they're shooting for next week or maybe shortly thereafter. Charlie, this has been sort of a slow crawl of just trying to get vote by vote in the House. Do you think that we'll see this happen this session, and kind of what is making it such a slog in the House?
I think it will. And I think what's slowing it down now is a lot of pushback by sincere people of a religious conviction who are concerned. They personally feel that this is a lifestyle that is against their moral standards, and they don't want to be in a position where they feel that they have to accommodate it or acknowledge it. The Catholic Church has been very active in its opposition to same-sex marriage. A number of the black ministers in the city of Chicago have come out against it. And so that's the kind of, if you will, institutional pressure holding it back. On the other hand, the public opinion surveys suggest that most folks don't see it as a big deal, particularly younger people. Folks Mike's age and my age are more likely to not like the idea than folks your age. But as time goes on, there's going to be fewer of us around and more of you around, right? So I think this is inevitable. And Mike and I both have the ability to look back and look at historically what's gone on with gay rights in the state of Illinois. We both remember when legislation to ban discrimination against people based on sexual orientation was first presented. And it was a joke. It was embarrassing to watch lawmakers make crude comments as they shot the bill down. It got, what, maybe 13 votes in the House. And slowly over time we got to the point where, okay, we've decided as a society we don't want to, in essence, bully people, make fun of them, deny them the rights of other folks just because of their sexual orientation. And then within a matter of, really just a few years later, we legalized civil unions. And now, kind of at light speed, we're moving to the point where, as I say, I expect this session we will give committed couples of whatever gender the same legal right to marry.
Well, to the extent it's stalled here, or at least not quite there yet, and I agree with Charlie, it could well happen this session, and frankly, if it doesn't happen this session, it's going to happen soon. But I think the delay, if you will, or the balking, if you will, really goes to the mindset of legislators today. Most of them want to stay in office. I mean, that's why they view that as probably their number one priority, is to stay there. And here's what concerns them. You can have polls that show that a majority of people favor same-sex marriage, but they're looking at other questions in the poll. Are you more likely to vote for someone who has voted for same-sex marriage if you favor it? Or if you're opposed to same-sex marriage, are you less likely to vote? So in their mind, the people who are against same-sex marriage are going to go out and vote against them if they vote for same-sex marriage. And the ones who favor same-sex marriage aren't going to be as driven on that issue as the opponents. So they're not looking at the overall numbers. They're looking at the more likely to vote and less likely to vote numbers.
Well, and there's definitely some lawmakers in the House being kind of coy and saying, well, I want to get to know my district a little bit better. Mike, how much might redistricting play into this? They've got new people.
It might on the margins, but I go back to my, what I just said. I think this is, now with some of them, it may be a really a philosophical and moral issue. I don't want to necessarily paint them with a practical brush here if they have sincere feelings. But I think with most of it, it's just a matter, is this going to keep me from getting reelected or help me get reelected. And that's where they're looking at the intensity of the supporters and the intensity of the opponents. And they're concerned if they vote for it, that the opponents are going to be more likely to go out and vote against them on that issue than to have supporters get excited about supporting them because they voted that way on the issue.
Well, the Senate did do a few things this week, and we got just about a minute left, but on a practical matter, they did vote to raise the highway speed limit to 70 miles per hour. Mike, we have just about a minute. What are your thoughts on that vote? You know, we keep seeing it creep up there more and more. Do you think we'll see the speed limit go up this year?
Well, I think ultimately it will, and it may well be this year, and it would put us in line with many other states, including neighboring states.
Well, we'll have to tune in the coming weeks to see how these issues pan out. I'd like to thank my guests, Charlie Wheeler and Mike Lawrence, and thank you for tuning into this week's edition of Capitol View. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn, and we'll see you next week.